Okay, wow. So, what did you think about that video? It definitely proves that all of the myths about AAC are not true. So, let's talk about them for a bit. One myth is that there are prerequisites for children to learn AAC. AAC. Absolutely not. No prerequisites. As you can see, this was the first session with that little boy, and he did not have any prerequisites um, in regards to needing to be able to point to things, or he probably understood cause and effect, but you can see how cause and effect is also taught with the device. So um, one of the other one of the other myths is everyone should use the same AAC device or the same AAC system. Um, that's really not true either. It depends on each individual's strengths and weaknesses, and it also depends on what the team, and I say team because it requires everybody on board to help out and make the best decisions for each student. It can't just be one person's uh, decision. Um, so it depends on the individual student. So everyone should not have the same AAC device unless it is beneficial for that student and unless that is the best one. And I do find, in all my experience, I do find that LAMP is usually one of the best ones that fits, and it has been the most bang for my buck. Not that I'm paying for it or anything, but I get the most language out of it than I've gotten it out of any system that I've ever used. So, myth 3, AAC does not hinder or delay developing de, hinder or delay developing verbal speech. In fact, studies have shown the opposite. Access to AAC can actually increase verbal speech. There's not one student that I have worked with using the LAMP motor planning system that has not started verbalizing some of the words that are on it, and also in the same developmental sequence that I have taught it using the device or using the system. So I think that says a lot. Myth 4, we should always use photos before symbols. That's not true either, because when you're, let's say we're talking about lamb again. I keep going back to that, but it has a lot of power for me. But we're not learning the photos. We're learning the motor plan of where those symbols are, and that alone is a way of learning language, no different than our tongue and our mouth, and where all of those articulators are going. We do not um, we're not consciously thinking about where those movements are. So when we're using the motor plan with the lamp system, then eventually we want to learn that motor pattern so that we're not having to think about where our hand or what button we're pushing. It is very automatic and easy to use. So myth 5, using a device in speech sessions is enough. No, it takes a village. I need the occupational therapist to use it, the speech therapist, the teacher using it across the curriculum, the parents, I need to get them on board, and they need to model the language just as everyone at school does. I need their peers, typical developing peers, to learn their language. And the more you use their language, the more they'll learn and the more motivated they will be to use it. And myth 6, AAC is only for requesting. So remember a little bit earlier we were talking about picture exchange communication system, the PECS. I kind of have a little bit of a pet peeve with that because PECS was built on just requesting, and language is the overall um, concept of language is requesting and rejecting and commenting and socializing and gaining information. There's so many things that we do and say to get things that we need, as well as um, adding to conversations and communicating with others socially. I think that sometimes we forget that it's not about I want. It's not about using carrier phrases like I want, I see, um, I can. We don't go around talking like that as as adults, or even kids do not go around talking like I want this, I want that. Um, they have true conversations and they're able to answer questions and communicate socially with their peers. And I think we really do a disservice when we're teaching carrier phrases like I want, like, or I'm trying to think of some other carrier phrases just real quick, but I think like I want, I see, I hear, those are all things that are just taught strategically and very rote, um, and it's not about true language. So think about that just for a little bit. And I'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so I just put a couple of memes on here because I thought they were so fun, and they go along with some of my beliefs, and I thought you would enjoy them. So here's one, and then I think the next slide has one too. And here is another one of my favorite memes, um, just talking about one of our myths that we talked about, that there's a prerequisite skill for AAC, and this meme says breathing, and that's it, and that's absolutely correct. So um, definitely a good visual for us to remember that myth, that it doesn't take a lot of skills to start using an AAC device. Okay, so now we're going to go on to objective number 2, which is about assessments. We're still in module 1, and we're going to talk about all the who's, all the who's that help us to create a good assessment, because it can't just be the speech pathologist, it can't just be the teacher, it has to be a team approach on um, how we're going to get the needs met for this child so that they can have success with the AAC. So some of the questions that we're going to answer are: who needs AAC? Who is on the assessment team? And who can we contact to help us with assessments? In the state of Missouri, if you're billing insurance, only certain people can do that. So we'll talk about that in this section as well. So I hope you like it. Okay, so the first question we're going to answer is who needs AAC? So I'm sure you see tons of students in your class that maybe some are all the way nonverbal, maybe they are partially nonverbal, maybe they have mixed language where they use a little bit of AAC, and then they also use they may be verbal, and then maybe they also use some switches. So there's and even some of my students are all verbal and they still need some AAC to help them, that helps support them through their academics and their social times. So, and I'll also add this: some students who are verbal, that I work with, maybe they only use AAC when they're having difficulties with sensory issues, or maybe they're having some um, social problems or some behavior uh, issues because they may shut down, they may have a lot of difficulty expressing themselves when they're in those types of situations. So I want to always have an alternative for them, and that has really helped with their processing and their ability to control themselves and their behaviors. So I think that's a good benefit for using AAC. Um, so basically, anyone who cannot meet their daily needs with spoken language alone would likely benefit from AAC. This includes individuals who need help understanding as well as have limited language skills. So there's a wide spectrum of how we can use AAC and how to support our students as well as our teachers. Okay, so when we're talking about who uses AAC, I thought that this visual gave us a good representation of what that spectrum of students look like that use AAC. So let's look at the colors that are shown here. What I'd like to point out is autism, cerebral palsy, apraxia, and intellectually disabled make up the largest section. So you see those in the red. And those are the ones that are majority of our students fall under these categories. Then another thing that I think is very important to point out is that right there in the green area, it's in the middle, kind of the middle part of um, the spectrum, is that mixed languages, mixed receptive and expressive, mixed ways of using language is right there in the middle. I've heard many educators say, oh, they can talk, so they don't need a device, or they don't need support, or they don't need the visuals. This is absolutely not true and should be questioned and discussed as a team before any decisions like that are made. Because students do need AAC support even when they are verbal. So just make sure you think about that as a team. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is that towards the end of the spectrum is in the white area. Those are basically more unique diagnoses, and they are also represented here. So I thought this would be a good representation of that. Okay, so here's another slide that talks about some of our users, AAC users, and who they can be. They can be verbal, partial verbal, nonverbal, typical motor coordination, complex motor coordination. They can have intact vision, vision deficits, word finding challenges. So lots of different students will benefit. So I think we've covered all of that now, and so we'll go on to talk about who's on the assessment team. Okay, so this question is who is on the assessment team? Best practices is that everyone is on the team, that it has something to do with the student. Speech pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, special education teacher, parents and caregivers, students, the student if they're old enough to be a part of the team. Also, a Missouri certified evaluator. If the student um, when the parents have not Medicare, Medicaid, or they have private insurance, you can use a Missouri certified, you have to have a Missouri certified evaluator to do that, to help you do that evaluation in order to get insurance or Medicaid to cover the cost of the device. If you're going with a high-tech device. Or even a low-tech device. And then I've also provided you a link here This link will take you to the evaluator site for Missouri. So depending on which region you're in, you would access, that site or that evaluator. We actually work with, in Ozark, we work with TheraCare and with Allison Berry, and I'll provide that information if you're in the Southwest Missouri region. And she has been a great asset to our team, and we can talk about how we navigated around that and how she supports us. Okay, so um, I'm providing you here an informal assessment that helps the team make good decisions for each student. It's a really good form that I use. I'm looking at mine here. It's a really good form that I use, and I can't remember exactly where I got this, but it covers all the areas that you would want to have answered before making decisions on an AAC device, or even referring them out to an AAC evaluator for the state. So I thought I might, it's on, there's 5 pages to the assessment. The other 2 pages I'll show you on the next slide, but I thought I would just walk you through some of the sections here. And then also I provided a download of the assessment, a link on the slide, and then I think you'll also be sent those as well. So anything that I use here for the training, I have provided a link or I have provided a copy for you to use. So, and they're also, I have permission to use those. So on this AAC assessment, things that are talked about are, I'm trying to do the video and also look at the assessment. So just bear with me as I'm navigating both. One of the number one things is they're asking you how the student has communication attempts, who understands the student. So it includes the parent, it includes the siblings, it includes therapists, teachers, and even strangers. So you're going to complete that part. That's the very first section of the assessment. The second section of the assessment is the present means of their communication. So are they verbal? Are they nonverbal? It's just a checklist. Are they using devices? So you don't have to like write a lot of information. It's just a checklist, and so that makes it very easy and it's very objective. So the third section is the current level of receptive language. Maybe some scores on some different informal assessments that you've used. You could input that there. And then it asks for some examples or of how the student uses the language. It also, in that particular section, looks at how the child responds. Do they respond using graphic symbols? Do they respond using crying or sign language? Or do they respond using objects or photographs? Then in section 4, it's the current level of expressive language. So it goes through all of those things again that the team can look at to make good decisions. The next section 5 is the desires to communicate. Does the student desire to communicate? Do they shake their head? Do they point and use graphic symbols? Do they vocalize? Do they use eye gaze? And does an unfamiliar communicator understand these responses? I think that's going to be key as well. Then it goes into communication interactions, like does the student turn attention toward the speaker? Do they interact with peers? Are they aware of the listener's attention? And so you're going to go through all of these questions, and then you're going to score it frequently, always, frequently, occasionally, seldom, or never. And that will provide a lot of information to the team, as well as make give you a lot of information if you're referring out as well. Then the next sections look at gross motor and fine motor, and those are going to be important. So make sure that you have your physical therapist and your occupational therapist involved, because they're going to be a valuable player on this team to help you make good decisions about the device. Some devices are too heavy for some students. Some might need larger buttons for their fine motor dexterity and what they can manipulate. So make sure you cover those areas. Then if they have vision problems, make sure you fill out the section for the visual abilities of each of the child, and include your vision therapist or your vision teacher, vision impaired teacher, as a team member. Then it goes into asking you questions about their current communication systems, if they're using any. And then on number 11, it talks about their figure ground discrimination, and a factor of looking at different types of symbols, what is best for this student, especially if they have visual impairments. It even talks about reinforcers, so positive and negative reinforcers that would help someone in the evaluation to get this child motivated to communicate. And the very last thing that this assessment looks at is it goes into more academics, so it looks at pre-reading and reading skills. And as the student progresses through their language, we have to expect that they are going to be, as they learn their language, we have to expect that they're going to be expressive and communicative, even in the academic world. So we need to look at those areas and make sure that if we're looking and choosing a high-tech device, that it will accommodate for those academic areas. So, okay, on the next slide, I'll show you the next 2 pages of the assessment, because it is a 5-page assessment. Okay, this next assessment that we're going to talk about is invaluable when working with students who are nonverbal or have limited language skills, and this is called the communication matrix. I have provided a link underneath the image above that will take you to the website. Anyone can register, and the assessment is free for up to 5 students. And then the assessments after that cost a small fee of $2 per student. Matter of fact, at first I didn't ask my my school district to pay. I needed it so bad that I just paid the $2 per student, because I needed it and I didn't want to have to jump through all the hoops to get it. So, however, now my special ed director has been very generous, and after she found out what I was doing, been very generous, and it's no problem at all. But I was willing to pay. My point is, I was willing to pay the money, just because it was so valuable with how I was going to plan for the student and create their IEP. It's very simple to do. The program completes the matrix based on questions that they ask related to your student. And as you see in the color key, the gray means that the skills are all surpassed. The yellow is emerging. The orange is mastered. The levels going from the top down looks at language development from on that far left side where the gray is, and I think it's numbered 1 through 7, those are developmental skills from birth to age 2. It includes symbolic meaning and abstract and concrete symbolic language skills. So that is really good for our students who are nonverbal, and we need to know that information and how that is embedded into their language and how they use those skills to communicate. So that's a very significant piece that the communication matrix looks at to help us build good IEPs for our students. And then at the bottom in the gray, going from left to right, it also looks at types of language for refusing, obtaining, for this socializing, and gaining information. And I use this assessment to build kind of a visual framework for my students. It provides the parents and other educators a snapshot of their language abilities and can be updated during the IEP cycles to show progress, and it helps build quality present levels that lead to obtainable goals. So I might do this assessment at the beginning of an evaluation, and then I will repeat that at each IEP cycle so that the parents or the team can see how we're starting to fill in the matrix. And in my opinion, and a lot of speech paths opinion, if you build this foundation and you fill in all of these holes of their language, then it's not going to fall apart as we get into more complex language structures later on in their development. So this foundational piece is huge so that we can continue to make progress. The next slideshow, I'm going to show you a before and after of a communication matrix for one of my students, just to kind of give you that visual of what you can provide at your team meetings. And then I'll show you a short video so that you can see what the communication looks like. The communication matrix looks like on their website. So also, if you look at the very bottom of this slide, that's where the link is. So, okay, this is one of my students, and some of my students that I had, as you see here, I had from 2016 to 2000. I think I'd finished this one up in 22. So when I'm working with students who are nonverbal, I primarily have the caseload of nonverbal, so I follow them through their elementary and middle school and junior high years. And so this particular student on the left is a communication matrix that I completed when I first evaluated them. So you can see that they had minimal language foundations from, I think they were primarily functioning at a level 2, which is about a 3 to 6 month old, and then they kind of had little pieces of language in a level 3 and a level 4, but nothing solid there. And then in 2022, this same student was evaluated using this same informal evaluation, and you can see how they had built up their language, and they're very close to filling in all of these skills, which is very exciting because it also shows that they are ready to learn language, and they are ready to they've already started to become verbal. They're usually doing 2 to 3 word sentences or phrases, and that is so exciting considering where they were at the beginning of 2016.